Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining our live stream. Today, we're going to cover what is the future of manufacturing technology and Industry 4.0. So I've got a great guest for you here today who I'm going to introduce in just a moment. But first, just a couple quick things. First of all, I'm Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients through their digital transformations. Secondly, this is a weekly live stream. We do it at the same time, same place, same format, whatever platform you're listening on today. We stream to the same place every Tuesday, covering all types of things related to digital transformation. So thank you for being here today. This podcast interview becomes part of our weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast, which comes out every Wednesday. So if you go to transformationgroundcontrol.com, you can see all the past episodes we've done with that show. And then this interview that you're part of here today, the live production, will become part of our upcoming Transformation Ground Control episode that gets edited. And we add other content to it, and it'll come out as a proper podcast episode here in a couple of weeks. So lastly, before I introduce our guests, we're going to talk a lot about manufacturing here today. I'd love to hear from the audience. We're going to take a lot of audience questions here today. We have a very engaging speaker. If you haven't seen him speak before, I'm excited for you to see him. It's always exciting. I remember the first time I saw him speak and saw him in an interview. So I'm hoping you guys have the same excitement after hearing the conversation here today. But I'd love to hear your questions as it relates to manufacturing technology as we're going here today. So any questions you have, drop them in the chat. And speaking of the chat, if you don't mind also dropping in the chat what city and country you're joining from. Both Walker and I tend to draw international audiences, so it's always fun to see where everyone's joining from today. So city and country, if you don't mind just dropping that in the chat there. And last but not least, most importantly, our guest here today is Walker Reynolds, who's the CEO of 4.0 Solutions. So Walker, thank you for being here today.
Thanks, brother. Eric, it's always good to be here, man.
Yeah, good to have you back. This is our second podcast interview. And before we jump into the introduction here, I heard a rumor recently that you are going to be at the Digital Stratosphere conference in October. Is this true?
Yeah, that rumor is true. It was actually just finalized. It's really funny you say that. I literally just saw the email thread confirming that we're going to do it. Like right before this, I was reading the email and I'm like, oh, I'm doing Stratosphere again. Awesome.
So you didn't even know about it till just now.
I didn't even. I mean, I'm glad I'm doing it. In fact, I loved the show. I told you I didn't tell you this, but we're putting on our own conference, a community conference next January.
Nice.
And last night in our committee meeting, when I was talking with the committee, I said, well, I'd really like the overall feel of the conference to be very similar to what Stratosphere was. So
nice.
Anyway, so that's how much I enjoyed Stratosphere last year.
And that's flattering. Thank you. And I loved having you there, and it's exciting to have you back at that conference. I'm glad your people let you know before I put you on the spot live in front of an audience here.
I literally just found out. I mean, not even 10 minutes before we got on.
That's funny. Well, for those that don't know you though, tell us a little about yourself and about 4.0 Solutions.
Yeah, so I'm a solutions architect. I've been in manufacturing 25 years this year. So I started my career working for the end user. So I did stints, 5 years in mining, 2 years in the printing industry, 3 years in the steel industry, and 2 years in tier 1 automotive as an engineer. So I actually started out on the plant floor in mining. About 2 years into my mining career is when I moved into engineering. I went back to school, became a double E. And I've been in digital transformation my whole career. I mean, what I proselytize and what I talk about are solutions that I've built for manufacturers when I worked for the manufacturer. What I'm kind of known for is the architecture that is unified namespace. Unified namespace was originally just meant for me to solve my own problems, right? Make it easier when I worked for the manufacturer. I went into consulting starting in 2011, 2012. I think 2012 is when I went into consulting. I worked for a couple of integrators, and then I started my first firm in 2015, and we're 50 companies later now. So I'm 50 companies in. There's two primary companies I have in the industry: Intellic Integration, which is our engineering arm, and then 4.0 Solutions, where I'm at, which is education outreach, and we run IIoT.University and the Industry 4 Discord server.
Nice, very cool. Yeah, you've got you've done a lot here in the industry, not just with 4.0 Solutions, but you mentioned you've got 50 different companies. But what I find interesting about you is you know, a lot of companies don't have a clear vision or purpose, but you guys do. Tell us a little bit about sort of what is your vision and purpose of what you're trying to accomplish, at a personal level and obviously professionally as well.
So there's really two things. So number one, philosophically, all of my companies operate on the same 5 core principles. of transparency, authenticity, expertise, humility, and servant leadership. That's in service of creating the type of place that people want to work. So rather than treating, I always thought about, I don't want to treat people like commodities, that I want to treat them like partners. And so the first philosophy is creating the type of place people want to be. That is, and where we want to be is the place where we can maximize the gifts we were born with, and then develop skills that we weren't born with. But our mission, my mission, overarching mission in all of my companies, is to help save and create middle-class jobs in the United States. And the reason why is because I want to do my part to continue to, I believe in all the principles that America was founded on. I believe in the principles of individualism and industry, in individual property rights. I believe in those things. And I believe that, I believe that the Lord blesses us with gifts. That's why we're all different. We're not all the same. We have different personalities. We have different strengths. We think differently. We communicate differently. And a lot of that we're born with. We have a responsibility, I think, to maximize those gifts. But part of what makes the United States so great is that America is in a place where the government, the society, our economics are designed to make everyone benefit when individuals maximize what they're born with. And so when I grew up in the 80s in upstate New York, so in the Northeast, when manufacturing was doing this big, massive exodus, and I got to see what happens when the middle class declines. So my mission is to help save and create middle-class jobs through manufacturing, through creating a thriving manufacturing sector. It's not bringing back manufacturing as it was, Industry 3, right? Everybody's on the plant floor, lots of manual labor, but doing a smart manufacturing of the future, Industry 4, where it's more skilled positions. There are more people at the skilled level, and there are fewer people at the unskilled level. And that's how we revitalize the middle class in the United States. All this stuff we see on CNN and all the strife and all that jazz, all that is a function of the decline of the middle class. And I'm just trying to do my part to reverse that.
Yeah, no, it's very, very cool. I mean, it's good to have. I mean, it's interesting that you have that personal connection, and obviously an early formative thing that affected you young in life. You kind of have taken that here in your professional career to create.
I saw the impact of, like, literally what happens when manufacturing goes away. Like I saw it with my own eyes. My friends' parents, I grew up in a trailer park. My mom died when I was young. When I was 7, my mom got murdered by my stepdad, and I got adopted by a wonderful family, but with limited means. And, and my parents worked hard. We never wanted for anything. I never had hunger for dinner. Okay. So, but we lived very, very humbly. Okay. Seven people living in a 2-bedroom trailer when I was really little. Right. And I had a lot of friends who were middle class and upper middle class, and I was envious of their lives when I was a little kid. But what I saw them lose everything. I saw them literally go from middle class and upper middle class families to literally their parents were like working in gas stations and on farms. Like it went from great benefits, great pay, to working in gas stations and on farms. And that was simply because manufacturers, I mean, I don't remember growing up a single manufacturer opening in upstate New York, but I remember scores leaving. Yeah. And what it did, if you want to see the impact, just take a trip to upstate New York. Yeah. Just drive through upstate New York, drive through those communities and see what happened. And, so this is real for me. This is not, I feel like I have a moral obligation to do something. And so everything that we've done is built around that. It's built around being a force for good in industry. And sometimes that means I have to say things people don't like, because at the end of the day, the goal is to help save and create middle-class jobs. And sometimes that means I've got to say things that people just don't want to hear.
Yeah, but they need to hear it to be able to accomplish that mission that you're talking about. Yeah, very interesting. I think that's something similar you and I have. I don't know if we talked about this. My parents, when I was really young, they were teenagers, so they were 16 when I was born. I was not planned. It wasn't a traditional family in that way, but my dad worked at U.S. Steel in Gary, Indiana, before we moved to Colorado. And that same kind of thing. You saw the steel mill shut down. You saw the decimation of people's lives. And so it's pretty cool that you've kind of dedicated your life to that.
A little story there, right? Let's, my stint, I worked for Nucor Steel. So my stint in the steel industry was at Nucor.
Okay.
And Dan D'Amico was the CEO of Nucor Steel while I was there. And and if you guys don't follow Dan D'Amico on Twitter and LinkedIn, you should. He's a very, very highly outspoken advocate for industry in the United States. D'Amico's leadership was, let's create a place where people can flourish. Like I don't know if most people know this, but U.S. Steel was a predominantly union. Most of their facilities were highly unionized. Why?
Right.
Because there was an antagonistic relationship between the leadership and the workers.
Yeah.
None of Nucor Steel's facilities were unionized. And the reason why was because D'Amico led in a way that wasn't antagonistic. Like what he did was he said, let's create the place where people can flourish. So if you look at my companies, the way that we compensate people, there's no limit to the amount of money you can make. The amount of money you make is a function of your contribution to the mission. And we measure that. Nucor Steel did the same thing. I actually took Nucor Steel's pay structure and I adopted it to my companies. And I have looked at, when I was growing up in upstate New York in the 80s, if you had asked leaders, right, hey, why is it manufacturing's moving away? Where is it going? Most people would say, oh, it's because of labor. It's unionization has made it so that it's too expensive and all this jazz.
Yeah.
And the question I would ask is, why did they unionize?
Right.
Yeah, I would be like, why did they union? Organizations that have really, really strong leadership that enable employees, that focus on enablement and respect of their workforce, they don't have a union problem. Okay.
Yeah.
There's no problem with labor when leadership enables labor. Right. And so part of that first philosophy I talked about, creating the type of place where people can flourish and want to work, is built on that philosophy. I tell my leadership team all the time, we have a responsibility to our team. Like don't ever take the intellectual shortcut. Oh, they're just a whiner, or don't ever do that. Yeah. Don't ever do that. Put yourself in their shoes, look at their perspective and ask the question, what do they need from us? What do they need from us? And there's a huge dichotomy across organizations as it relates to digital. You want to, because you're obviously going to ask the question, who is digital, who's not digital? I'll tell you what, there is a philosophy in the organizations who become digital, and that philosophy is one of enablement. It is one of our greatest resource in this organization are the frontline workers. That it's operations. They know what our problems are. We got to give them. It's our job to give them the tools to solve all of our problems. And so that's why that's important to this conversation. That leadership philosophy. There, I've been doing this exchange. I've gone really hard at Microsoft lately, right? And probably everybody's wondering, hey, why is Walker being so hard on Microsoft? The answer is because while I'm happy that Microsoft has come up with a new, it's Azure IoT operations, whatever it is, AIO. I'm glad I like their new approach, but I think the reason their previous approach to Azure IoT failed was because of leadership strategy and philosophy. So while they have a new shiny object in AIO and Microsoft Fabric, the leadership strategy and philosophy hasn't changed. And that is, they see customers as a means to an end, right? And I don't want to be too unfair to Microsoft, but the reason I'm pushing so hard is because I don't believe their strategy and philosophy lines up with what the market actually needs, and I'd like to see that change.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that point too. I've got a follow up for you on that thread. But before I do that, real quickly, want to acknowledge the audience here and where everyone's joining from here today. I've got Richard from Memphis, Tennessee, someone joining from South Carolina, Saudi Arabia, Norway, Joburg, South Africa, Ireland, Munich, Germany, Milwaukee, Budapest, Hungary. So people from all over the world. So I didn't get to everyone who dropped in the chat here, but thank you for being here, everyone. And if you've got questions for Walker or I as it relates to manufacturing technology, Industry 4.0, please drop those in the chat. We're going to get to those here in just a second. So just to maybe start at a real high level, Walker, and sort of building on what you're just saying about saving middle-class jobs and really helping the manufacturing industry, you also dropped the word Industry 3.0 in your just a moment ago. You dropped that term. And I know you've said in some of your marketing collateral, you talk about how you started your journey based on the vendor's outdated focus on Industry 3.0, while you felt the need to focus more on Industry 4.0. Can you just help us unpack for those that don't understand what's the difference between Industry 3.0 and 4.0?
Yeah. So if we look at, I was having this conversation with Rob Tiffany on LinkedIn last night. So industry 3.0 and 4.0, those are actually like standards and philosophies, right? And they primarily originate in the EU. When we talk about that, when we say Industry 3 and Industry 4 here in the United States, we've conflated the terms. So there's the third industrial revolution and the fourth industrial revolution. And the strategies and the standards, Industry 3.0 and Industry 4.0, those are lagging behind the actual industrial revolution. So what's really important to understand is that generally in the United States, when we're saying Industry 3, Industry 4, we're also talking about the third industrial revolution and the fourth industrial revolution. If you're in the EU and you say Industry 3 and Industry 4, they are almost certainly talking about the standard and the specification that comes out of the EU on how to get the most out of the third industrial revolution, how to get the most out of the fourth industrial revolution. All right, with that caveat. So what's really important to understand is that the industrial revolutions are not something we created. They are things that happen when civilizations continue to advance. Okay, if we were to nuke the entire earth and just go right down to dirt, and we start with civilization all over again, and some species evolves and we industrialize, there will be an Industry 0. There will be a point where we have the written word. Okay, for us, Industry 0 was the printing press. Without Gutenberg, that was the first information highway, the printing press. Okay, up until that point, you had scribes having to literally handwrite every single copy of a book, and because of that, books were incredibly expensive. They were not, the information was not democratized in any way, shape, or form. Gutenberg's printing press democratized the written word. Okay, the first industrial revolution was the steam engine. So now what we can do is we can use physics and mechanics to make work easier. The second industrial revolution was the assembly line. Okay, the third industrial revolution was the automation of industrial processes that the assembly line created, and the fourth industrial revolution was the convergence of IT and OT technology. So in 1998, TCP/IP won the protocol wars. So now you have a transport protocol that gives us the ability to create networks where everything can talk to one another. That was the rising edge of the fourth industrial revolution. All right. Companies who are Industry 3, they have an Industry 3 mindset. They are still operating under the mindset of when we were just automating the industrial process. That is putting a PLC. We think of each asset as its own standalone thing, and that it provides a specific function in the business. And the only thing we care about is that function. That is, what widget does it make? What step in the manufacturing process does it do? That's it. And you think about it, when you in the Industry 3 mindset, your requirements end with the function. You do a functional acceptance test with a list of things that the machine must do. In Industry 4, we are much more focused on the data that asset generates. Because Industry 4 is about making data your primary commodity, taking all the events across your business and putting them together so that we can ask software to find patterns in that data, in those events that we can't see with the naked eye, right? What is machine learning? Machine learning is computers learning from data. Artificial intelligence is computers mimicking human intelligence. In order for you to use machine learning and artificial intelligence, you must have a digital data infrastructure. You must collect every event. You must organize every event. You must contextualize every event. You must normalize every event in order to do those things. And that's what Industry 4 is about. And more importantly, I argue, it's what the unified namespace architecture is all about. It's all about giving you everything you need to unlock the potential of Industry 4 through enabling your employees to solve your business problems one at a time on a common infrastructure.
Right. And capturing that data and
right.
Connecting them into the network.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to unified namespace here in just a moment, because I have a feeling, I sense that you have some pretty strong opinions about that, but let me come back to it.
Yes.
Yeah. But before I get to UNS, back to UNS, there's also this concept of Industry 5. How is that different? What's that you're sort of looking forward to Industry 5? What is that? And how is it different from 4 and 3?
So there's a debate going on right now. Industry 5 we're still in that, arguing theoretically. I one of the greatest lessons my dad taught me a lot of stuff, and I talk about my dad all the time. At 50 years old, and I talk about the lessons I learned from my father.
Sure.
But one of the things that my dad used to say was that, you shouldn't fight theoretical battles. You should win the results war. Like he would always say, don't debate people. Like only debate once you have the proof, right? Because people can't, it's very easy for people to just argue theoretical ideas over, and they're just talking past each other. He would always say, focus on the results. Okay. It's very important to understand that there are no results from Industry 5 or the 5th Industrial Revolution yet. It's all really theoretical. So there's no proof. Okay. So there's a debate going on as to what the 5th Industrial Revolution and Industry 5 will be. Okay. In the EU, the argument is it's all about people. Okay. It's about sustainability. That's all horseshit. Okay. It's wishful thinking. Okay. ESG comes from the concept of what we want Industry 5 to be. Okay. Now, not that ESG isn't a noble goal. It is, but it comes from the concept of what we want Industry 5 to be. Here's what Industry 5 actually is. This is what it will really be. The 5th Industrial Revolution's already started. Most people just don't know it yet. Okay. And it started in the fall of 2022 when GPT 3.5 really came out. Okay. And then GPT 4 came out after that. That is it. Industry 5 and the 5th Industrial Revolution is about the convergence of human and artificial intelligence. It's about making human beings superhuman beings.
Right.
And we're seeing this, and I'm sure you're seeing this with your employees. You have people who are really unlocking the potential of generative AI, and you have some people who aren't doing anything with it.
Right.
And the difference, the chasm between those two types of people, one is a superhuman, and the other one continues to fall further and further and further behind incrementally. That's what the 5th Industrial Revolution is all about. It's about turning us as people into superhumans. And imagine this world, right? Imagine this world. Imagine you go to a conference. Let's say you go to Digital Stratosphere in the fall, and I have a brain implant, or I'm wearing a heads-up display over a pair of glasses over my eyes. And when I walk into the room, okay, all I can choose to see a heads-up display on every person, what their name is, what their LinkedIn is, what their title is, what their experience is, and I can deep dive into that so that I could better select the people I'm going to have a conversation with. Okay. Right. Imagine you're in business development and you have that tool at your disposal, and you're going up against the person who's trying to hand out 500 business cards to 400 people, 399 which are going to throw that business card in the trash.
Right.
All right. That's the future. And by the way, the technology exists today. And that is all about taking artificial intelligence and combining it with human intelligence to make people better.
Right.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. Now, kind of along these lines, this is from Darian, our podcast co-host here. Darian on LinkedIn says, what are some of the high skill positions you mentioned earlier that people should focus on if they want to work in Industry 4 or in Industry 5, as you're describing here?
All right. So great question. I'm gonna rather than positions, I'll say this. All human beings will become citizen developers. So all of us who work in industry will become citizen developers. So that is through no code and low code applications. We are going to use technology to build useful technology for either me or other people. Similar to the way that everybody knows how everyone dabbles in Excel. right?
Right.
And it doesn't matter where you work. Everyone dabbles in Excel.
Right.
Everyone dabbles with OneNote. Imagine that on steroids. That's what citizen development is, right? Everyone is going to be a citizen data analyst. Okay. So what's important is that people focus on digital fluency. So rather than the role itself, focus on digital fluency. So everyone needs to have a basic understanding of how code works. Do you have to write software? Of course not. But what I recommend people do is they go to Codecademy and they take a basic introduction course into Python. Okay. You could literally get all the digital fluency you need on software by just learning how Python, which is an interpreted language. I'm not going to get into those technical elements, but if you learn just how Python works and you can write a basic for loop in Python, that makes you digitally fluent in how software works. Okay. I think everyone needs to understand the concept of data operations. So converting just a raw event or a series of raw events into something that could inform me. So for example, a temperature, if I look at a temperature as a snapshot, so that is all I see is a number. It's the event. If I don't know that that has a unit of measure called Fahrenheit, then I don't know what the temperature actually is. That is right. Data operations. Data operations is taking the temperature off of a sensor and adding in something else to turn it into information. Okay. If you have to have a basic understanding of data operations, I think you have to have a basic understanding of the software development lifecycle. So, and the reason software development lifecycle, it's because it's the most mature. You need to understand the concept that everything that all solutions, all problems I solve are going to be standing on the shoulders of all the other problems I've already solved. So as opposed to taking them as a standalone entity, right? Stand all by themselves. I think those are the things that people need to be focused on. And then what you do is you figure out how to apply those things to your domain of expertise already. And if you look at the breadth of our business, I'll focus on business development because they're generally the least technical people, right? We have our business development staff ranges in ages from early 60s all the way down to maybe 30 is the youngest. And if you look at the way our 63-year-old business developer, who by the way is a world-class sales guy, been doing it 30 plus years, absolutely slays it at every conference. He can sell $5 million in his sleep. I mean, the guy's just a beast, an absolute animal. If you look at how he does his job relative to how a 30-year-old business developer does her job, it's night and day. They're completely different. And the difference is he focuses a lot more on brute force, 100 calls a day, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And
the traditional way.
And she focuses on quality over quantity. And she's not a whale hunter, nothing like that. But she focuses on, let me start with the quality lead first and asking the question, how do I get the quality lead? And she uses technology to do that, right? She's focused on technology. Whereas the older sales guy is focused on the notebook and the Rolodex. And so to answer your question, what position should be focusing on? I wouldn't focus on the position. I would focus on the skill set, digital fluency, the stuff I laid out, and then figure out how to apply that to what it is you do.
Right. Yeah, it makes total sense. Okay. Yeah, it's more of a mindset, cultural shift, and you're setting that foundation to be able to adapt to the things we can't predict right now.
I was watching an interview this morning when my habit is I wake up, I read, I go through a series of newspapers, I check my emails, I check my Discord messages, and then somebody had sent me an interview. Steve Martin did a couple, 2 decades ago, the comedian. Somebody had asked him, how do you break in? What do you tell people when they ask you how to break into Hollywood? And he said, well, there's no way you don't just break into Hollywood. He's like, you get discovered. And the way you do that, number one is start by understanding that your expectations of the job is never what the job actually is. Number two, be so good no one can ignore you. That's what digital does. Right. Digital makes it impossible for the gatekeepers to ignore you.
Right.
Like if you figure out a way to leverage digital, look at me. I can be a jerk. And a lot of it's by design, but I could be a jerk. You know what I mean? And but because of what I've done with digital, people can't ignore me. I'm a perfect case study. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Super interesting.
Yeah.
Now, here's a question from, and actually, I'm going to lead into a question or a topic I've heard you talk about before, Walker. But this question that I'm going to start with is from Vaughn on LinkedIn. Vaughn says, "How will AI affect the way people work in the future? What impact will it have on the jobs humans do?" And I remember you talking, I think it was in our last podcast interview, you talked about the IQ, the average IQ of the average laborer, the average, not the laborer, but the average person in the labor force. How do you think AI is affecting people's jobs just in general and the skills they need to have, other than that digital fluency that you're talking about?
Yeah, if you look, I mean, communication skills are really important. Your ability to communicate with artificial intelligence is really critical. Okay, so that's where the IQ piece comes in. So the right now the average employable IQ is around 73. That's set by the U.S. Army. We know empirically, if we look at the way that skill sets change over time, the impact that artificial intelligence is going to do is it's going to AI and machine learning and automation are going to engineer out the positions that the IQs from 73 to the 90 work in. Okay. Artificial intelligence is going to, what's going to end up happening is the average employable IQ is going to be somewhere in the mid 90s, which right now is about the mean in the West. Okay.
Right.
So what's going to happen is your entry level position is going to be the person who's on the mean in intelligence, right? So that's a person who can think in abstract terms. So I can think in multiple layers. They can play chess. They're not limited to checkers. Okay. Right. So they can see multiple moves in the future, but also they have significant communication abilities. That is, they have the ability to speak effectively and they have the ability to write effectively. And that is the fundamental difference. It's going to make people who communicate in writing better at communicating and writing. And it is going to make them the time to value when they're solving problems is going to get shorter and shorter and shorter.
Right. Yeah. Very interesting. Now, I want to come back to this unified namespace. And there's actually some questions coming in from the audience already about UNS. So let's just dive into that here for a second. First of all, I know you've got some strong opinions about unified namespace. Before we get into those, though, tell us about what unified namespace is and what your strong opinions related to it are.
Sure. So unified namespace is an architecture I created between 2003 and 2005 in that salt mine I worked in. And it came from the problem of the salt mine is 7 miles long. Okay. And when I'm on shift, I'm the only technician on shift to cover the entire mine. Okay. We have all this smart stuff talking to each other over Data Highway Plus. So the blue hose. So a serial network. We have all this stuff talking to each other. It's on a network, but not the network because we weren't using Ethernet at the time. How can I take all that data and put it in a place where I can quickly retrieve the information I'm looking for when someone calls about a problem? So when someone calls and says, "Hey, belt 40B, section A is out. It's just stopped. We have an indicator, a little light bulb on the thing. It's not running." How can I diagnose the problem without having to drive out there and look? How can I diagnose the problem first, then drive out there and fix? Okay. So, or fix from where I'm at. So unified namespace was all about organizing our business. First off, semantically organizing everything in a hierarchy, the way the business is structured, and then capturing all the events and then being able to manipulate that data into information for me. So how could I put together all the data points I need to diagnose that call when someone makes it? Okay. That's what unified namespace is. It is a architecture that is semantically organized. Think of it as a file share where all of the events in your business are coalesced. So every IO data point, the work order from the active work order from the ERP, the bill of materials we're using right now, all that stuff organized generally as ISA 95 Part 2, which is Enterprise Site Area Line Cell. And then we organize it based on function. So I might have an OEE namespace that's got the OEE calculation in it.
Right.
It provides context all data in current context and fully normalized, and it gives you current state. That's what unified namespace is. It is built on a common technology. So a unified namespace in general, we're using like broker technology. The most common is MQTT. That's what UNS is. It's an architecture that is the digital foundation of your infrastructure upon which you plug in all your software and you consume and produce into that unified namespace to solve problems for the business. We were talking about Odoo earlier here, right? You guys are in the ERP business. You guys did a video on Odoo called We Don't Talk About Odoo, right? Why is Odoo disrupting the ERP industry? You want to know one of the reasons why it's disrupting? Because you can plug Odoo into a unified namespace.
Right.
You can build an MQTT connector so it can produce and consume from a UNS. So you can extract from Odoo things like bill of materials, manufacturing operations, all those kind of things into a unified namespace. It's one key reason why Odoo is disrupting, right? But here's another reason. It's low code, no code. So that it can support citizen developers and citizen data analysts. So you guys even shot your own video on this and think about it. When we were at Digital Stratosphere, Epicor was there, right?
Right.
And I had a conversation with the new leadership at Epicor. I think they came from Oracle, right? And she was fucking amazing. I mean, really, sorry. She was amazing, right? And one of the things when I was talking to Epicor, I was talking to the executive leadership at Epicor about this. She acknowledged, she said, you know, the age of putting ERP at the center of your business is over. ERP is a function of the business. It's a node in the business. It needs to produce and consume. Even she was talking about the need for a unified namespace. But anyway, that's what UNS is.
Right. Yeah. So why is this, or first of all, let me back up. Is this a universal concept? It sounds like, you know, there's maybe some different philosophical views on is UNS the right answer or not. And, you know, I guess my question is, why is there pushback, or why isn't this more universally adopted, or is it becoming universally adopted at this point?
It's becoming, I mean, we just got back from Hanover Messe and UNS was everywhere. I mean, everywhere. Companies I never even heard of. Right? You know, in general, most people who want to make sure that their product supports a unified namespace, generally they'll reach out to us, or they'll reach out to a member of our community, or they'll join the Discord server and ask the Industry 4 community to kind of vet the product. But I even saw products I've never even heard of, you know, using unified namespace and UNS in their language. And most of them that I looked at, there were some that were just full of it, but most of the companies who are saying UNS they have the definition relatively right. The definition is it's loose. It's not a standard, and it was designed to be flexible. It's designed to UNS is built under the concept that there is one thing in manufacturing and industry that matters, and only one thing, and it's production. And on the plant floor, you do whatever it takes to get the widgets out the back door. No one, absolutely no one on the plant floor ever says, we can't do that because the ERP doesn't allow us to do that.
Right. So we're going to stop shipping product.
Yeah. They just, no one has ever done that. I've seen it with my own eyes. Hey, it says we're supposed to go here, 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 here. Well, that step right there, that machine's broken. And so we're going to literally run this production halfway through that asset. Then we're going to move the work in progress over to that asset, and we're going to finish on that asset. Guess what? Most ERP systems don't support that mitigation tactic, right? Unified namespace was designed to be able to at least consume the events when you take that mitigation tactic, right? But also to be a single source of truth for your business. Where do we currently stand? When we do a DTMA, digital transformation maturity assessment, we're gauging digital maturity of organizations. We do these 23-point questionnaires and interview people in the organization. We're basically asking, what are you good at? What are you bad at? What's missing? Do you want to know what we've done? Almost 10,000 surveys total. So we have a large longitudinal sample. Do you know what 91% of respondents in manufacturing say is their biggest problem, the biggest what's missing?
Let me guess. Data?
It's the access to the data they need to do their job. 91%. 9 out of 10. Now, they may say it differently. It might be the supervisor might say something like, well, what I need is visibility into current state. That is, what are my assets are running? Where are we relative to plan? What he's saying is access to the data I need, but he may say it in a different way. 91% 91% of respondents across the entire organization say the same thing. Access to the data they need to do their jobs. You want to know the best way to find out what an organization's problems are?
What's that?
Ask them for all the spreadsheets they built to solve problems.
Right.
You just ask them, let me look at the spreadsheets. The spreadsheet is always a functional solution to a specific business problem. And if you can inventory all those things, you know what the business's problems are.
Right. That's a great point. But a lot of times software vendors are trying to sell you software, say, oh, don't worry about those spreadsheets. You don't need to worry about that.
Well, this is where our new conference, we're going to do Prove It. We're doing this conference in January next year, right? And by the way, I was originally going to reach out to you and say, hey, why don't we do this at Stratosphere? Why don't we do what we're going to try and do at Prove It at Stratosphere? The only reason I didn't was because our key sponsor requires that it's in Dallas because they're a Texas-based company. And actually, their headquarters are in Dallas. So, but otherwise, I would have reached out to you. But we're doing this conference in January called Prove It, a whole new approach to conferences, and where we're gonna send all the vendors who are going to participate, and we're going to ask them to come and prove it that their solution can support a unified namespace. It can plug into an existing infrastructure and it can start producing and consuming. And there are all these rules centered around it, like what we're going to do with the vendors. But why are we doing that? And the answer is because if you go to the average conference, one of the reasons I loved Stratosphere so much is because we talked about actual problems. We talked about actual use cases. We talked about the actual limitations in digital. We talked about the actual successes.
Right.
Most conferences are designed to trick executives. It's flashy. It's flash. It's marketing. It's designed to stand up your booth as quickly as possible, tear it down as quickly as possible, and go to the next conference and trick people with flash again.
Right.
I was at IFPAC, which is the largest life sciences conference in the United States. I spoke there in Washington, D.C. a couple of months ago. And they had a poster session where they had maybe 50 vendors in the exhibit hall. And I went through the exhibit hall and I asked, and all of them were selling to the same customers, right? They're all selling digital solutions. And what question do you think I asked them? I went and I said, how do I plug your thing? How do I connect your thing with his thing?
Right.
And the answer invariably was, well, we might have a connector for that, or we have an SDK, or you can't. And what blew my mind was that all of you are trying to sell stuff to the same customers, and yet none of you talk to each other.
Yeah.
Like,
it's super fascinating.
That's not digital. Go ahead. Sorry, man.
Right. Yeah. And it's almost as though, there's an assumption that my one solution is going to solve all your problems, when for most manufacturers, that's not true. You're going to need, like you said, ERP is not going to be the center stone. You're likely going to need multiple systems. You're still going to have some spreadsheets. You might still have manual processes. You've got to be realistic about what it is you're doing with
what people need to understand is that it's a journey. It's not a project. Digital transformation is a strategy. It's a strategy. It's not a project, and it's a journey. It's a journey that makes your organization smarter through making data the primary commodity.
Right.
You're not collecting the data for data's sake. You're collecting the data to turn it into information so that you can get smarter.
Right.
And as you get smarter, what you want changes. What we want is a function of what we know. And so if you look at the journey, organizations start really, really small. At least they should start tiny. They shouldn't be spending more than $40,000, $50,000 at the absolute most in the first 12 to 16 weeks of their digital journey. And that's proof of value.
Right.
But 3 years down the road, they've spent millions. Why? And they've gotten tens of millions in return. And why is that? Because they started small and they charted a path that allowed them to adjust as they exponentially got smarter, and their needs and wants changed by knowledge squared.
Right.
Yeah.
And as you learn, you start doubling down on those lessons and saying, okay, now we figured it out, or we kind of know directionally where we're going. Now let's start spending our millions of dollars rather than out of the gates. Let's just commit.
If you're spending your millions of dollars on scaling the solution that you've already quantified the ROI on.
Right. And proven out.
Yeah.
It's a great philosophy. So I think you've alluded to this quite a bit here, Walker, but maybe we'll just dive into a little bit more here. This is from Demetrios on YouTube. Demetrios says, how can UNS offer some quick wins to small manufacturers, or just manufacturers in general? What are some of the quick wins? You talk about starting off small. What are some ways that manufacturers can be using UNS to get business value?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. So we have a manufacturer based here in Dallas they originally brought us there. We're a Kepware partner. And so they found us like on Kepware's website. They called us. Kepware is a device drivers and data aggregator that has an OPC server, if you're not familiar with it, although most people are. So they bring us there because they want us to use Kepware to connect to their equipment. And what they wanted to do was use the Kepware's transaction tool to basically store some data in a database and build some data dashboards in Grafana. Real simple, but it was linear. Connect this data point and store it in this table, then have Grafana call it from that table, right?
Right.
What we did that was a small manufacturer, does 25 million a year. What we realized when we walked the plant floor was, wow, these guys are in the Stone Ages. They've got state-of-the-art technology. They got a $20 million printing press over there that's got Siemens D445 motion control on it, like state-of-the-art XML-DA servers. There are hundreds of thousands of data points on that machine. There's a database running on that machine that has tracked the input from the HMI, from a Beckhoff HMI, for the last 5 years. And they have no idea that data's there. They have no idea. Wow. So what I did was we went to the owner of the company and I said, I want access to that press. And I want to show you for the next 12 weeks, you give me access to the press and you give me access to people who will answer any question. And we'll show you the art of the possible on that press. Here are the rules. I'll pay for it. So you don't pay a penny. I'll bring my own servers in. I'll do everything. Me and one of my other engineers. You have no say in what we build. We're building the art of the possible. You don't give any feedback until the 12-week mark. Okay. If you like it, you buy it and we do the rest of the facility. If you don't, we'll rip it out and it didn't cost you a penny. The first thing we did for that small manufacturer was build a unified namespace. We structured the business. We put that press in there, press 103. We created a functional namespace called Align, one with OEE and MES. And then we literally built an endpoint that was the XML DA endpoint that came from the D445 motion controller, and it brought in all the data points off that motion controller. Then what we did was we built an OEE functional namespace that could consume the state of the machine, the waste it was generating, the in-feed coming off the film unwinder, the out-feed coming off the film winder, from the printed film winder, and then we calculated OEE, and then we tracked a bunch of stuff from that database. We brought that in as a data set, and then we went to the customer, and before we ever demoed any of the solutions, we showed them the business and the data organized in a way they could understand. Why? Because it looks like a file share. It looks like a thing that they deal with all the time. So what they realized was, oh, unified namespace is a way of me finding the data I'm looking for, organizing it in a way where I can find the data I'm looking for, even if I don't know that data exists. So I wonder what the tunnel temperature is inside that printing press. My unified namespace is structured in a way where I know where to go to see if that even exists.
Right.
That's how small manufacturers benefit from unified namespace. And think about it. That 12 weeks was the most valuable 12 weeks that company has ever experienced. And today they generate $50 million in revenue. Same assets, they literally doubled their production. They didn't work harder. They doubled their production by becoming smarter. And and that started with a small unified namespace on one asset.
Got back to that data, access to data challenge, the 91% metric that you mentioned.
Too many vendors are speaking a language operations don't understand. When I was in Hanover Messe last week, I had a conversation with a young guy. I wish I remembered his name. I have a photo of him. I could probably look it up. But he said he follows us, and he said, I take what you said, and I've created like my own. I want to attribute the statement to him. I just can't remember the kid's name, the young guy's name. He's 24 probably. He said, my biggest frustration, he's in vegetable oil refinery, and they're building a brand new greenfield in the Gulf of Mexico or whatever. And they have one in Spain. They have a refinery in Spain. And he was talking about the challenges of explaining to people the value of digital in operations. He said, it's like going back to 1870 and trying to explain to people the value of electricity when they've never experienced it.
Right.
It's like it's speaking a language that operations doesn't understand. If you want to know the fundamental problem in our industry, besides the rampant corruption okay, and exploitation in our industry, which is, it's horrible. And you and I agree here that this is a major problem, corruption and exploitation in our business. Martin, thank you, Vaughn. The biggest issue is the OEMs are, whether they're doing it intentionally or unintentionally, for a moment, let's not be cynical. They are speaking a language that operations doesn't speak. And therefore they are trying to sell them tech for tech's sake, rather than starting with the customer's problem and working their way back to the tech that they need.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great point. And I think that's even more pronounced with AI now. I mean, you think about all the stuff we talk about, generative AI, data hallucinations, and it's like, what are you talking about? Like, I just want to know how to get the product out the door.
You do hallucination. When people ask me, is AI going to replace human beings? No. Yeah. Are there some positions that AI is going to be able to effectively replace? Probably, but that's going to be the exception, not the rule. Right. The rule is going to be hallucination makes this the case, by the way. For those of you who don't know what hallucination is, it's basically AI getting it wrong, creating a thing and insisting something is true when it's not true. That's a hallucination. That's where the human being comes in. That's where the domain expert comes in. What it is we become AI supervisors. AI is a lever for making human beings better. But the human being is still the last point of failure. You can't allow artificial intelligence to just take over, because artificial intelligence hallucinates. It gets it wrong. Right. The human being, the domain expert, the human supervisor is going to be the final gatekeeper to implementing something that artificial intelligence suggests we should implement.
Right. Gets back to that communication too, being able to communicate with AI is another important skill.
Correct. Very important. Very important.
Yeah. Now, speaking of strong opinions, more strong opinions, Microsoft versus Google. I've seen you post recently just on LinkedIn about kind of your thoughts on how the dichotomy or the difference between how Microsoft and Google are approaching manufacturing technology and manufacturers' needs. What are your opinions here, and how do you summarize your opinions here?
Yeah, I'm actually going to summarize it in two conversations. Okay, so at Hanover Messe last week, I had a chance. In the interest of full disclosure, we've been working with Google on a technology called MDE. Their technology called MDE. So Google is a strong believer in partners. Like, Google doesn't think they have all the answers. And so they work with lots of partners they don't have strategic partnerships with. So that is, I don't get it. There's no financial benefit for me to say anything good about Google, other than we have architects where we're selling their labor to Google in consulting services. But there's no capital gain for us other than we've sold the labor. All right. Google believes heavily that there's no way that they can be the domain expert for industry. Google understands what it is they're good at and what they're not good at. That's the foundation of humility, right?
Right.
So here, Microsoft doesn't understand that. Microsoft, when they say that they work with partners, and I don't want to beat up Microsoft too much, but Microsoft's really, really good at building software, right? They're good at building things like Excel and OneNote. Microsoft is terrible at industry, and probably of all the organizations in the world, they are the most terrible. You want to know why Google is a little better at understanding the problems in industry? It's because they build shit. Microsoft doesn't actually manufacture any of their stuff. Microsoft's not in the business of manufacturing. They have partners that are in the business of manufacturing, strategic partners that they financially benefit from. But I had two conversations at Hanover Messe, both with incredibly brilliant architects. Okay. One was a guy named Clemens who's the principal architect of the new ADX platform at Microsoft. And he's like the messaging queue expert there. Brilliant dude, world-class architect, highly, highly, highly respected. Okay. And then another guy named Gregor at Google, who is also a brilliant, gifted, world-class architect. Two architects on the exact same level. Those conversations couldn't possibly have gone more different. And those conversations went differently because of the strategy and philosophy of the organizations they work in. Microsoft's philosophy, and this is the biggest issue, Microsoft they believe they know everything, and it's their blind spot. Their blind spot is they believe that, there's that famous video where the developer at Apple days was critical of Steve Jobs, and he was like, what do you know about OpenDoc and all this stuff? And Jobs says, you can make some people happy some of the time. And then he goes in and he says, I don't need to know the value of OpenDoc. What I need to know is, does the customer want this? Right. And he tells a story about the first laser printer. And he says the reason that laser printer is amazing technology is because the customer wanted this. It printed a thing that I could go to the customer and go, do you want this? It didn't matter what the awesome technology was in the print controller. It was irrelevant. It was a tool. It was a tool to solving the customer's problem. Do you want this? Microsoft does not understand that. Google does. Google understands what the customer's problem is. And the customer's problem is that the customer only knows what some of their problems are. Microsoft wants to tell the customer what their problem is and then just sell them a thing for it. That's the fundamental issue. Wonderful people, brilliant, gifted people work at Microsoft. Brilliant, gifted people work at Google. But the difference is the approach, the philosophy, and the strategy. And right now, it is impossible for me to recommend to anyone that they should be working with Microsoft in industry. It's impossible. And my team was appalled when we had the conversation with Microsoft, 6 of us. When we walked away, we said, now we really know what the problem is. When I asked them, why did Azure IoT failed? You know what they said?
What?
Because no one bought it.
Right.
Honestly. Now you're the chairman of an organization. And if you were to ask your chief experience officer, hey, why did that product that we were offering to the market, why did that fail? If your CXO said to you, well, because no one bought it. Yeah. What would you say? You'd say, why didn't they buy it?
Yeah. Why? What's wrong with the product?
Well, what's wrong with the product? Microsoft said the reason it failed was because no one bought it. I'll tell you why no one bought it. Here's what happened. Up front, Azure IoT, and I don't want to bash them, but this is an important thing for the industry to understand. The values of the organizations you work with matter.
Right.
What they believe, what their mission is, what their values are, what their strategy is, and what their philosophy is, it matters. You need to ask those 4 questions. And if you get a deer in headlights, run.
Right.
Okay. So Microsoft starts with, we have the largest CRM in the world. We can get a meeting with anyone. Okay. I've got some new technology that we've invested $50 million in developing. Let's find a market. Let's find a market to exploit. You know what Google does? And AWS, by the way, let's give AWS their credit, and Snowflake. Okay. You want to know what they do?
What's that?
They start with a customer problem and they work their way back to a specific solution. Right. But they build that specific solution on a platform. And once they've built 10, 12, 15 solutions on one platform, now they have something they can wrap into a product to sell to more customers who have that same 12 to 15 problems. Right. Microsoft doesn't do that.
They start with the technology and they just dive straight into the technology, and they become purist about what the technology solution should be versus what the customer needed.
When I was talking to the architect at Microsoft, this guy Clemens, who by all accounts is an unbelievably gifted architect, and he is brilliant. He never once asked what the problem was. Right. When I sat down and had coffee with Gregor, our team sat down and had coffee with Gregor. All Gregor asked me about was what the manufacturer's problems were. It was glaring. It was as if Microsoft thinks they know what all the problems are because we're Microsoft. And Google, which by the way, you would think Google would be the same way. They're not. The philosophy, the strategy is totally different. It's let's go find out what the problem is.
Right.
Yeah.
And then solve it.
Yes. Yeah. And then solve it. And then solve maybe 10 or 12 of them and package that as a solution.
Right. So you obviously, you're talking to a lot of customers every day, a lot of manufacturers throughout the world. You're out on the speaking circuit, talking at conferences. What are some of the most important things that manufacturers need to know about just Industry 4, digital transformation, Industry 5, AI, all the stuff we're talking about here today? What are the most important things that manufacturers need to know and understand about operations tech over the next 2 to 3 years?
So let's do 3. I'll do 3. So number 1, first and foremost, you must know that digital transformation is a strategy that manifests in a journey that never ends. because it's in service of making data the primary commodity in your business. And if you want to know what that means, look at Tesla, look at Amazon. Amazon predicts what you're going to buy 6 weeks before you buy it. And that's how they get it to you in 48 hours or less at the best price, because they're never paying a premium on shipping. They're never, right? That's how they're doing it. And they're using ML and AI to do that. Data is the primary commodity. Okay. Number two, mission and values really, really matter. So, for example, as a manufacturer, when you're deciding who your partners are, you better know what their mission is and what they believe, because this is a relationship. It's a journey you're going to go on together. Okay. And they better have your best interest at heart. So you how do you vet that? You ask the questions about mission and values. Obviously, you ask the question about strategy and philosophy, but here's another way to do it. Ask them how much, how long, and what's the TCO? How much is this going to cost me in capital expenditure up front for the first 12 months? How long is it going to take before I see the first value? And number three, what will be the total cost of ownership? If they cannot tell you that and give you that answer, if they can't give you that answer immediately, then the answer is it's going to cost however much they can convince you to spend.
Right.
Okay. And number three, your pathway to security in your business is through digital fluency. Okay. Your number one risk in your business is not using technology to expose you to Russian hackers. Okay. Your number one risk in your business are operating a business that only needs people who don't know how to read email, who will put a fob into a port and not know any better, who will click on an attachment and not know any better. Amazon and Tesla do not have a problem with people clicking on attachments, okay, and infecting the inside of your network. Digital fluency is your path to security. Yeah. Those are your three absolute things. What I will say is this: if you don't have a digital strategy statement, anybody who's listening to this, you're a manufacturer, you're in industry, I want you to go to the highest ranking person in your organization, and I want you to ask them, what is our digital strategy? And if they can't give it to you in 3 sentences or less immediately, then you don't have a digital strategy, and that's where you start.
Right. That's great. That's great advice, and good way to sort of summarize everything we've talked about here today. And we could go on for hours, but we're out of time. I appreciate you being here, Walker. This is a great conversation as always. So
my pleasure, brother. Real quick, can you, because I only just found out that we're going to do Stratosphere again. By the way, I love Stratosphere. In fact, when I came out, I said everyone should come to Stratosphere. It was a wonderful show. I would describe it as intimate and incredibly useful, fruitful. Okay. Any plans for, like, how is Stratosphere going to be different this year? Before we
well, different speakers. We've actually broadened the sessions into 3 tracks. We've got sort of the keynote track, the keynote stage, but then we've also got breakout sessions. So there'll be, for a lot of it, there'll be 3 parallel sessions happening concurrently, so people can pick and choose who they want to see and what topics they want to cover. So that's the main thing. We'll have more software vendors involved to kind of bring different perspectives, and we're just adding to the speaker base too, to get just a lot of different opinions there. So Stratosphere2024.com is the event page, still under construction, still finalizing and putting together the agenda, but the ticket sales are up now. You can go to Stratosphere2024.com to learn more about it. And glad you're going to be there.
Anybody wants to find me, you can go look up 4.0 Solutions YouTube channel. And if you're not a member of our Discord server, you can go to IIoT. So IIoT.university/Discord.
Yeah. Follow Walker if you don't already on LinkedIn, YouTube. You've got a great YouTube channel, 4.0 Solutions, and hope to see everyone at Stratosphere or a upcoming event here soon. So thank you, Walker, for being here. Really appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you in October, if not sooner. Thank you to the audience for being here today. Hope you all have a great week, and we will chat with you all soon.